Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. All right, everybody. Welcome to the Good Enough Line of Sight podcast, where we're going to be talking to different people about aspects of the hobby, getting perspectives, and hence my snazzy title, Line of Sight. So today, as should be fitting, the first guest...
I thought we were talking about Thundercats. You said line of sight beyond sight.
Our first guest is because I couldn't get anybody else.
I had a feeling that was it.
But we have Josh here, and you all know Josh from the numerous battle reports that he's been in. But I wanted to sit down and chat with him because Josh is very new to the hobby. So one thing I have learned from all the podcasts I've listened to is you always start off asking everybody the same question and just kind of let the conversation go from there. So the question I'm going to ask you is, what got you in to miniature wargaming?
You.
Oh, thanks. Seriously? That was it?
I think it was right before the year before the pandemic or something. My son, actually my oldest son, was having some issues. He would have been like 3.5, 4 at the time. He was just having a little bit of issues with fine motor skills. And the person that was working with him was like, if you could get him to do something that has minute detail, like painting with minute detail or coloring or something that really forces you to like really focus and like hone your hand skills, that would be really helpful. So I knew that you were doing gaming. I didn't know what, like, other than I knew Warhammer, but it was very like out there for me. I didn't really know what that was or any of that sort of stuff. But I was like, okay, Chris might have some stuff laying around. So I think the way it started was I bought a couple of fantasy minis. He seemed to like that. And then you had a giant tub. Like years.
It's what Josh came to know is officially called the pile of shame.
Yes, you had like a giant pile of shame, and then you also had that giant pile of
the bits box.
The bits box, yeah. So you passed along your bits box to me, and I was like, I could probably make some guys out of this. And from the bits, I was able to make a couple of characters and a couple of things. And Andrew loved it. He really started working on the nuances and things, and the attention span of a 4 or 5-year-old. But 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. But we were having a lot of fun with it. And as we were going through and doing that, I just really started getting into it. And then we started playing and things like that. And that's kind of how it all started. I picked up my first couple of boxes of things from a hobby store that was right down the street for me, where they were actually selling things a lot cheaper than they should have been. The people working didn't really know what they were doing. So I kind of found some stuff that way. And then once I started, I was like, maybe I'll buy a couple more boxes, and then a couple more boxes, then I'm like, oh, let's do some armies and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it all started.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
And so then
I had no interest in gaming to start.
It was just simply building, the hobby side.
Just building, yes.
How long ago was that?
2019, 2020, like I think it was 2019 because that's when I started dabbling into it. But then the pandemic hit.
So that's how you know I'm getting old, when to me, you haven't been in it that long. It's like 4 years.
Oh, yeah. God, how long have you been into it?
Well, then again...
Reagan was in office, I think.
Well, no. Not that old. No, but, with the whole 2020 lockdown thing, the world paused. And so when we came out, to me, it picked up back with 2019. So those last 2 or 3 years haven't existed.
So you're like, Josh has been doing this for like a year and a half.
Yeah, seriously. I honestly thought, like, you just started this a couple of months ago, didn't you?
No, and truly, if it wasn't for the pandemic, two things probably unlocked it for me, which was, and I think a lot of people now in the hobby, there's a good number of us that are like this, but 2 things did it for me. One was the pandemic. The other half of it was, and the pandemic tied into that, was like discovering YouTube channels, finding somebody else that could give me advice on how to paint and do all that sort of stuff. And then the other thing was finding what worked for me in terms of painting. But having all that time during the pandemic was definitely a huge benefit.
So now that you're in it,
yeah,
would you say the hobby side is still your favorite side, the gaming side your favorite side? You're a big fan of like hunting and finding rare stuff. What aspect of the hobby do you like the most?
That's a good question. Playing the games is definitely rewarding, but since I don't get to do that as much, because like chose to have a family and like do all that kind of stuff. I don't get to do that nearly as much as I want to.
The views expressed in this interview do not reflect that of the management.
No, I love my family, and I wouldn't trade them for anything or anything that we do.
No, I'm saying you're making fun of all the people who do hobbies and don't have family. Like, those guys are losers. That's why they play.
No, those are the guys that like have giant houses devoted to this stuff, and you see their stuff online, and you're like, wow, somebody really likes IKEA. The detail shelving and everything else. And again, that's not a jab. That's admiration. No, I would probably say truthfully that the finding minis, cleaning up rescue minis, and then painting those rescue minis is probably my favorite, because I'm a big nostalgia guy. It's all about the 80s and 90s for me.
That was actually going to be the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Yeah. You are a huge fan of really old models.
Yes.
Like everybody else is wanting to get the new sculpts, the fancier details, but Josh goes out of his way to find the old pewter, out of print. He's been struggling really hard recently to not spend a ridiculous amount of money on an old metal Nagash.
Oh yeah, the original Nagash with the Liberace robe and ring fingers.
So why is that? Like the sculpts are getting fancier, prettier, bigger, better, but you like the old retro stuff.
I do, and I think it goes back to like the fact that I like all of the old retro stuff. It's not just that. It's I collect vinyl, I collect VHS. I still have a lot of my VHS from when I was a kid. One of the other hobbies that I have is like fixing and remodeling like old 8-track players and Betamax players and stuff like that, like tinkering with that kind of stuff. I think that there's something to a lot of that, and I think from the gaming standpoint and being into the older models, I think it's something of like the innocence. I like the newer models too, but there's definitely a cuteness factor where it's not taking itself so seriously, I feel like.
All right, so you just lost some credit with some of our listeners by referring to this stuff as cute.
I know, yeah.
But
it happens.
It does.
But no, I think that it's genuinely like you mentioned that model, Nagash. When I look at that Nagash model, as I mentioned, it has that Liberace vibe to me. Like, what they were going for, but they weren't going for over amounts of detail. They weren't going to be overly crazy about anything. They were just trying to get the idea out there, and then you paint it up, and then your imagination fills in the gaps. And I think there's something to that. Now, that being said, I love a lot of the newer models. I'm sitting here trying desperately not to curse as I pick apart all of the newer Terminator models. I don't know what the heck I was thinking bringing these over. But,
well, I mean, we figured why not to kill two birds with one stone. So we're both actually building stuff while we're having our little conversation here. So as a quote-unquote relatively new person into the game,
I would definitely say I'm very new, yeah.
So is there anything, I know this might sound like high school newspaper interview stuff, is there anything you wish you'd known before you got into the hobby? Like, what are some of the big surprises, both pleasant and unpleasant?
Okay, so I'll start with the unpleasant surprise. I didn't realize, well, and I guess I should have realized up front, just like any other hobby, people find that you're... there are gatekeepers. There are people that are going to say what you're doing is not the way it's supposed to be done, or you don't understand all the lore, so you can't do that.
Is this people have told you face to face, or stuff you read online?
Just vibes you get online. I try to stay away from all that mess. But I will say the biggest positive, or something I wish I had learned before was, I wish I had started off doing more research into alternative gaming and alternative ways to paint. Because traditional painting, or like I guess what's considered the normal form of painting, which is the craft paints, thinning the paints, which I know you do.
Base layer, highlight,
base layer, yeah. I initially got in and I was like watching all these videos, and that's all I saw. And to me, that was taking a lot of time because again, I only get a couple of hours every night, maybe if I drink coffee and I don't have grading or something else to do with my job. I get a couple hours every night to be able to do this stuff. And it was taking me so long. It was like one model was taking me a while. Even if I was doing it over and over and over again, I couldn't seem to do it faster. And I'm not like an immediate gratification person with painting, but I do need to see some sort of results. Because if I'm doing a squad of 5, and I know I need 30 of these models done, and it's taking me a month and a half to do 5, I'm like, okay, I'm never going to get these on Chris's table. I'm never going to be able to like paint and enjoy these things.
Oh, I can definitely sympathize with that. It's you need to see some kind of measurable progress that to you feels like you're moving forward with it.
Yeah, exactly. So I discovered, and again, this kind of goes back to the negative end of things too. Not for me personally, but I saw other people have to deal with it. I discovered for myself what's now referred to as slap chop, and again, that's going to be one of those hot takes that a lot of people are going to be like, oh. But slap chopping for me. Two things saved me into not giving up on this hobby. You getting into OPR, which is way more tolerable to me than Warhammer.
Oh, well, okay. Well, we'll get into that then.
And the other one is slap chop, because I have gone all in on speed paints, contrast paints. I still do, if I'm going to give a hero model some TLC, I'll definitely still do the other stuff. So it's there. I know I can do it. But
when you have 50 skeletons to paint, spray them white, and then wash them with a bone color, and
hell yeah,
and that's it.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah, black base, dry brush, gray, and some tan to get some contrast in there, and then hit it with the contrast bone, and I'm done.
So then let's go to what you mentioned a bit ago. So you've played a number of tabletop games. You played the gold standard, and I've had some people give me grief for calling it that, but it's the largest tabletop wargame in the world. You got Warhammer.
Yes.
So you played a couple games of 40K.
And I still buy the models.
But what did you think of the game? How many games have you played of 40K, and what are your impressions of it as a gaming system?
I think for me, and again, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I think for a lot of people that are into OPR, the complexity of it to me was a little much. I can't remember how many games we played back to back, but I remember like really simple things throwing me off. Like I think we played a game. It was my vampires, but my vampires were jumping over a fence, and I had to roll like 3 different sets of dice, and it was like they were horseback, and it was like, yeah, your dude tripped, and it's like hurting him. And I was like, what? Why is that going on?
I'm trying to think that would have been...
Yeah, it was fantasy. But it was like, I was trying to jump over fences, and it was like you had to do things like that, or, so many different roles, so many different things. And then I find the OPR community, like, I follow your comments. I comment on it myself a lot. I find it to be a lot more embracing of things in terms of, like, if I'm playing Warhammer, like I'm doing up these Terminators right now, right? Well, we're not really WYSIWYG folk, and I know you can play Warhammer and not be WYSIWYG, but it seems like that's a bigger thing for them.
It is. Okay, so then it sounds like the learning curve was a bit of a detractor.
Yeah, because I think I could have gotten better with it with time, but time is definitely a factor when I've got family obligations, work obligations, and some people can do it. But that's not my mindset. My ADHD kicks in, and I'm just like, it's too many moving parts.
The amount of effort it would have taken to get to the point, and that you would have rather spent it elsewhere.
Yeah, and okay. I mean, there's y'all watching the battle reports can see I forget crap all the time in OPR. So imagine if I was trying to do that in
playing a GW game. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So the bulk of what we play has been OPR, but we've tried some other games. I haven't put up battle reports for all of them, but we've played. Let's see, we played Carnival. We played Rumble Slam.
Oh, Rumble Slam! I want to see those videos so bad.
We've played. What are some of the other ones we've tried?
Some of the ones we tried that you have posted was Don't Look Back.
We tried Don't Look Back. So a slight breach. So the next question, I guess, is
Carnival. Did you already say Carnival?
I did say Carnival. Malifaux. That's right. We tried Malifaux.
I love Malifaux. Malifaux's a fun one.
So it sounds like then, just based on your reaction to mentioning different games, you tend towards the skirmish games. Would that be a fair assumption? Or
yes, yeah, because my ADHD can concentrate more, and but it also means I don't have to get as far along. Like if I'm working on an army, we just played one today, and you absolutely blasted me. But we got to do skirmish today, but I got to get my jungle soldiers, my predator military force wannabes.
How long did it take you to go from box to based? I like that phrase, from box to based.
From box to based. Well, and keep in mind, none of those were boxed because those were all either rescues or 3D prints. But I would say probably about a week. Less if I'd actually spent more time.
And then also to kind of clarify, how many hours a day in a week are you able to put towards it? So maybe we should ask hours.
2.
So 2 hours a day.
2 hours a day.
Okay, so that's still a fair amount of time commitment.
Yeah.
But in 1 week, you went from nothing to
a skirmish
to a 10 model skirmish team, fully painted, fully based.
Yeah. And I'll do skirmish all day, every day. And then what I like is, for me at least, and I don't know if maybe this falls under the advice column, but for me at least, I'll do up enough for a skirmish army. And then if I like how they're running and I like some of the mods that I can put, then I can look at the full army and be like, okay, do I want to commit more to this? Like, I already committed just building off a couple of little tiny skirmish armies. I'm finding more customized jungle characters and things online. I had another box of the Catachan Jungle Soldiers from GW. So the skirmish gives me an idea of how I can commit. And the game goes faster.
It's like an appetizer for you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And I suppose in that case, the rule set for one-page rules has an advantage because if you do like the skirmish level, it's the same rule set for a larger level. You're just adding more models. Whereas if you learn to play Kill Team, you don't automatically know how to play 40K.
Exactly, yeah.
Or if you play Warcry, you don't know how to play Age of Sigmar.
I'm also a big fan of... and again, I feel like this is cliche to say, but one of the big things that I like about OPR2 is I can build what I want, and if I think stuff looks cool, because I'm also cursed with like the whole, are vampires the best army out there? Probably not, but I just think they're badass. So I love vampires, and I want to build a vampire army. I don't have to, there's not a lot of other stuff I can do. Plus, I can go out and find my own models, either rescues or customizable ones.
Okay.
But yeah, I like doing skirmish, either first or just in general, because it makes my ADHD happy, but it also means I can try out stuff. So
then we get you like the smaller, you like the fact that not too much of a time commitment still allows you to enjoy the hobby at its fullest. Like for you, playing a skirmish game is just as fun as playing something bigger. In some cases, maybe even more fun. Like if you had the choice between a massive game of one-page rules Grimdark Future versus a skirmish game, you take the skirmish?
No, I'd probably still play. I'd probably still do the full version of OPR. It all depends. Like skirmish to me, like we did today, you can get like 2 or 3 games in, so you can kind of reset and try again.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But the full games, I love the satisfaction of getting that stuff out there. So like I worked a long time to like rescue and build and do stuff with my orc army. I still have more to do, but it's like I can go out and keep adding stuff and keep finding stuff and not have to worry about a whole bunch of that other stuff. Not have to worry about the reward is there for the full army, I guess I should say.
Okay. Tell me a bit about the not necessarily the learning curve, because you talked about having to figure out how to build and paint and all that. Mm-hmm. What about the learning curve in terms of you had to buy paintbrushes, you had to buy paints, you had to get a workstation, you had Did it feel like a little too much? Were you able to do a bit at a time?
I did a bit at a time. I started out with, and I still use, cheap Walmart brushes that come in the variety pack with the various sizes. I bought some on Amazon that are just a little bit more expensive, but I don't go super high end with
I mean, the ones that everything that has ever been shown on the channel has been painted primarily with a package of brushes, 10-pack that I get from Amazon for $10.
There you go, yeah.
So I spend a buck a brush.
Yeah, I built a table that originally was in my garage. It's just like a little workspace table. I can send you a picture of it if you want to show everybody. But I built I had like a little table. It was in my garage for a while, and then I started realizing, because my garage is not heated, I was very much a victim of the elements. I could do nothing for like 4 months out of the year.
You needed somewhere to work.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, again, my wife, her art studio, which was our living room space in our house, her art studio turned into sort of our shared studio office space.
A hobby space.
Hobby space, yeah. So she basically cut hers in half because she kind of focused in on what she was doing, and then the other half became space that I could utilize. So I brought my table in, and that's where I do all my work and stuff now. And I've got my little TV and stuff like that there.
Well, then that brings me to a next question. What does your wife think of this particular hobby?
She was fine until the first time my kids made her go to the hobby store to actually see what things cost. They were like, we want to buy this for Dad for his birthday. And
she's like, okay, it'll be what, $10, $20? She looks at it. What?
Yeah, so then she starts doing math, hanging out in the garage and stuff. But no, she's always been like super crazy supportive of my niche hobbies of things. Like I said, I collect vinyl, I collect VHS. My kids have gotten into it, and it started off with doing it with my son. So that quickly became, kind of the benefit too. Was she was like, oh, this is something that he does with other, and I think having the hobby, she's been very fine with it, and I think she knows that I will not go insanely over the top. Like I have a big pile of shame, but a lot of it is found stuff, sales stuff, or different types of models and things, and she's just like, meh. He's not putting us in hock.
Right. Like if she were to total up the pile of shame, she doesn't look at it and go, honey, this is 6 months of mortgage here.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, she definitely looks at it and kind of goes like, this is definitely a little bit of a pile. But I try to keep it somewhat manageable in terms of like, I've got different types of stuff. Like I said, I've got, I went to, I think I mentioned this to you. I went to Ollie's of all places, which is a secondary retail store here. It's like a retail store, but what they get is old inventory from other places that they sell it for cheaper.
Like a Big Lots.
Like a Big Lots, yeah. But they had model kits, and they had like some Chevys and things like. And so I'm finding these model kits, and I'm going to, I find them for $5, and then I'm going to mod them with extra bits to make like orc transports and vehicles and things. So that the box takes up a lot of room, but it was like $5. It's more about the time that I'm going to put into it to kind of customize it.
All right. Well, that's good to hear that your wife and others, people's significant others and stuff would support the hobby. What I have heard some people say, and I think it's a fair argument, is there are worse ways to spend money and time.
Yeah.
So my wife, I love playing video games. I love playing tabletop games. And she says, I would much prefer you spend your time and money on a tabletop game. And I said, well, why is that? She goes, when you're done, you have something to show for it.
Yeah.
You have a model.
You
have the terrain you've painted. Like you have something tangible that you can say, here's the fruit of hours and hours of labor. Whereas you can spend, an entire evening playing something online, and when you're done,
it's like done.
Like you got an achievement, or you got some cool gear, but it's online. It's not totally real. Now I'm not trying to knock people who make huge achievements on video games and stuff. I'm saying from her perspective, she preferred this hobby because to her it seemed like it had something. There was a pot of gold at the end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's a lot of there's something, like you said, there's something to the visual of it. There's something, I think, to that accomplishment as well, because it's a customizable accomplishment, and there are a lot of different hobbies that offer that. But I would also argue it's one of those things where you look at it at the end, and the model, especially now that some stuff is so monopose, you'd be like, okay, the model itself isn't that, but I painted it my way. Like, I did it my way, and I either customized things. Like, I've gotten into kit bashing stuff, like I said, and doing some other customized things. So it's kind of cool, like you said, to not only have the fruits of your labor, but to have that fruit of your own expression, and to have something that you can kind of look at and be like, that's my army.
That's my army.
That's my stuff.
Yeah. So then on that note, then, when you're...
I do have a story about, you mentioned the, it's better than... if I could tell the quick story, because it's hilarious.
Well, if it's bad, I'll just cut it.
If it is, yeah, it's not that bad, but it's hilarious because it was I was at the friendly local game store that I go to a lot, and I had one of those moments. Maybe some of you guys online can relate to this, where some dude was just following me around, like not like lurching, but just sort of like you could tell. I think he was looking to make friends, and I was looking at models, and I had like 30 minutes before I had to get to picking up my kids. But anyway, so we're having a conversation, and we're having a very similar conversation to what you and I are having, which is like, hey, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? And he's like, I have a wife and all this other stuff. And we were talking, and then I said, a friend of mine always says, like I was talking about you, and I was like, yeah, a friend of mine always says, there are worse ways to spend your time and money and your hobbies and stuff like that. And then he said, oh, yeah, I mean, it's way better than doing cocaine. And I was like... Those are your only two options.
Yeah.
Hard drugs.
Well, I mean, some have referred to models as plastic crack.
Absolutely. But I loved the idea that this dude, I think he was just kind of in that moment feeling like super awkward. But it was just hilarious because he was like, yeah, literally, he didn't realize he was insinuating that basically there were two ways that could have gone in life. Hard drugs.
Although what is kind of funny is when he's thinking of like the cost. It's like, so this hobby, what else could I get with this kind of money? Oh, I could get into cocaine.
I could get an 8-ball on Friday.
It's not I could go to the movies or no. I could get into hard drugs.
But again, I think the guy was desperately trying to make friends, and he was a nice enough guy. I haven't seen him in there since, I don't think. But that's the other thing that I would say is having somebody to do this with that can definitely enable you at times.
That's important.
That is important. That is important.
Because like you said, if you... No, I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet here. But like if you had questions...
It's your channel, you do what you want.
About painting stuff, about building stuff.
Yes, you've been a saver on more than a couple of occasions.
Whereas otherwise, and I'm not trying to say YouTube is useless, but you'd only have YouTube. You'd have to hope someone had made a movie. So one of the things that helped you get into the hobby was having a personal connection. You knew someone in the hobby who could help you through it.
And I knew that if I got an army painted up, I had somewhere to take it and someone, relatively mentally healthy, that could...
Well, I mean, I'm a grown man who plays with little plastic toys.
Pew! But I knew that I had somebody and somewhere to go where I could play, and I wasn't going to be in a toxic environment for playing. I think that's important. And yeah, absolutely. Somebody that I could text. And not just about this stuff. I'll toot your horn. I'll toot your horn for you, Chris.
Oh my.
I was working on a project. And I think it's been on the channel, the Godzilla. I was working on that Godzilla, and I was doing it up mainly because I had the model, and it was to remember a friend of mine who had passed away fairly suddenly. And I was having the darndest time because it was my first attempt at doing slap chop on a large scale, like old school Aurora Monsters model from the 50s. And I just dropped that with the great Crazy Glue side down. But I was having a devil of a time getting the shading and everything right that first time through. And I probably will continue to have issues. But I think I texted you out of the blue and I was like, what am I doing wrong? Because this thing looks like a giant brown turd. Because I was hitting it with green, and then I was hitting it with a brown wash, and the brown wash was absolutely washing everything out. Even though it was a light brown, I even diluted it. I was like, well, this looks like Godzilla poo. It's not doing it. But you gave me some suggestions on how to lighten up the tone and kind of just go back to the drawing board a little bit without having to strip the model completely. And that's the kind of stuff that I think can definitely put you in a position where you're like, forget this, forget what I'm doing, I don't want to do this anymore. Or you go to YouTube and it's like, I need to know how to do this, but there's no specific video or suggestion for exactly what you're doing.
So what a shock. To really get into the hobby, it's helpful if you have a small community, a personal, something close.
Enablers. I will call them enablers. It's important to have enablers.
It's important to have enablers.
But honey, Chris said if I got this, I would be cool.
Yeah. Well, should we tell the story of what happened the first time you came to play a tabletop game? I think I'm still on your wife's poop list.
Oh, and
it's not even my fault. So it's a little off topic, but we'll share this with him because again,
it's a good story.
Since this whole podcast is about new to the hobby, getting into the hobby, learning curves and speed bumps.
Yes.
So Josh came over to play a game. I was going to introduce him to how to play 40K, and what he didn't know, and I didn't tell him, is my kingdom doesn't get great cell phone reception.
Mm-mm.
And so we were playing, and as everybody who's played 40K knows, it takes 2 or 3 hours to play a game, especially if you're teaching someone. Even if you do a small, low-level points, it takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, my phone rings.
Yeah.
And it's Josh's wife. Now, I've never met her. I've never talked to her. I'm like, how the heck did she get my phone number? Yeah. And so I pick up, hello? And she's like, is my husband Josh there? Oh, yeah, sure. And I hand over the phone. So she had called a coworker of mine to get my number because she had been trying to get a hold of Josh for the last hour.
She had somebody else's number. She called them to call you.
But she, and I've actually run into this quite a bit, where new players don't realize how much time a game of this can take.
Oh yeah.
I invited another friend over to play, and he's married. He has, I think, 3 or 4 children, and it was on a Saturday, so they had some plans. And so he's asking his wife, where can I fit in some time to go play with Chris? And so we figured it out, and he came over, and I said, so how long do we have? He goes, oh, I got about an hour.
Yeah.
And I just looked at him, I thought, well, we can set up the board, and then you can come back next week, and we can actually play.
Right.
So there's something else for new players. Depending on what game you get into, especially if you do like full-size battles rather than skirmish, you need time.
Yeah, and I would say, though, that OPR is definitely friendlier to, because they have that turn system, and the alternating activations, I think, actually speed things up to a point where it's way more manageable.
So you definitely prefer alternating activations to you go, I go.
Yeah, sidebar.
That kind of is alternating. I got to come up with another way to describe the your whole army, my whole army.
Yeah, I mean to me it's a difference between I've heard it's more tandem. Tandem is the OPR version where it's like back and forth. It's like a tennis match where it's instead like my entire army goes, your entire army goes. And again, that's personal preference. But the idea of me standing there or you standing there the entire time kind of tapping the foot to try to figure stuff out. It's always like...
Now, that's definitely a topic for a future podcast, though. Activations. Yes. Like, what's the best way to make a game flow, but at the same time... I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for? You don't want to ruin the play for a narrative, but you don't want to ruin the narrative for the gameplay.
Yeah.
So how do you work that one out? Okay. Yeah. All right, so let's another cliche question here. What would you recommend to new people? Like, there might be people who... just when you were getting into the hobby, going back to that question I asked earlier, what do you wish you had known, or what do you wish you had done differently when you first got into this? What mistakes did you make that you can tell new folks don't do it this way?
Oh, the biggest mistake I made when I first got into it was out of sheer ignorance and just desire to paint stuff up. I bought, because I didn't know, like originally, again, we were going to play Warhammer, but even with Warhammer, I didn't fully understand or grasp what I was getting into. So when I would go to the game store and I would either rescue minis or if I would buy a box, I was buying a little bit all over the place. So, like, I've got 3 squads of Necrons, and that's it. Because at the time I was like, Terminators, I want to paint these up, and they're going to be silvery and cool. And I painted them different metallic colors, and they went up super fast. Okay. So I was like, and they were all rescues, but I painted them all up. And then I was like, sweet, I've got 3 squads of Necrons. That's got to be enough for something. No, I was nowhere near. So I would say don't do a ton of research, but vest in something you think is cool. Vest in something that you think you might want to get more in. And the other one, too, is I highly recommend, like I said, if you've got a friendly local game store, even if they don't have them out, ask about rescue minis. Ask about minis where people are like, screw this jazz. Like, other people I've heard recommend, be like, oh, no. You want to get into it and, like, do boxes first and then do your own thing because you'll know more about it. And I'm like, I don't know. The cheaper, like...
That's an interesting point, because if you buy a rescue to learn how to paint on, well, if you screw up the paint job or make your mistakes, like it was a used model anyways. Whereas if you buy a brand new box, there will be this mental block, like this is new, this is pristine, and so I have to do it right the first time.
Yep, and like I can still get, every once in a while, I can still at my friendly local game store find, squatty Space Marines for $1 or $2 a piece. So I could get 10 for $10, and that's
as long as you're okay with older models.
Exactly.
And maybe
And if all you're doing is practicing to get like your color scheme down or to refine your skills with painting and stuff like that, sometimes you can even find newer stuff that way. That's my recommendation.
Oh, here's a question for you that folks might want to know: how long did it take before you considered yourself a competent painter?
Oh, I'm still not there.
The stuff you're painting looks pretty good. If folks go back and look at your models, like,
oh yeah,
you're not going to win a golden demon, but neither am I. And I've been painting for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So how long was it before you went from sitting down and just kind of staring at your model and brush, going, I don't know how to start, to the point where where you look at a model and you're like, I think I know how I want to go about this, and within a couple hours, it's done?
How long has it been?
How long before when you started
before
painting?
I
started feeling confident where I can, whatever paint scheme I want to do, I think I can do it.
I probably spent about the first year, a little over the first year, doing traditional painting. And again, this is a very unique story to me, but I did the first year or so of just traditional painting. And I never felt that way about it at all. When I discovered Slapchop, I had all of these orcs that were unpainted and even unprimed, but they were on bases and they were there and they were ready to go. So when I discovered Slapchop, I tried it out on a couple of test models, and then I primed like 30 orcs. And I did Slapchop on all of those orcs. And by the time I got to the end of that, I felt like I knew my contrast and speed paints well enough, and I was good enough at managing the dry brush stage that I knew my color schemes well enough that then when I translated that to looking at like what else? I went back to vampires for a while. I did some Space Marines. I've done a couple of other things. Like anytime I went to other models or I was seeing rescue models, I was like, "Oh, I know what I could do with that."
Okay.
So probably like a year and a half, but it probably would have been faster if I had discovered Slapchop sooner. But again, a lot hinges on that for me because that's what I've been refining and working on is like kind of perfecting, quote unquote, my
Slapchop.
Yeah.
So I guess then kind of tied to that, when you're deciding what models to buy or paint, what armies to build and play, how do you make the decision? Do you start with a concept, then find the models, and then see what army list works? Do you look through the army list and say, oh, that looks kind of fun?
Yeah.
How do you pick what armies you're going to play? I
literally go off of what gets me excited when I see the model.
Hey, this is a family-friendly podcast, Josh.
And I'm like, I could slap that chop right on there.
I don't want to have to put a warning at the start of these, Josh.
You know that thing where you like look across the club and you're just sort of like, that.
From across the gaming store, his eyes saw the bottle of paint and he knew you're coming home with me.
I'm gonna slap that chop right there.
Stop.
That's the. No, but genuinely that's it. And again, I know a lot of people, you and I have talked about this, I think, just in gaming and stuff, but I know there are a lot of people, mad respect if that's how you do it, they want to know, like they'll look at an army list and be like, what can I demolish with? What can I murder with? What's going to be big and badass and just like, it's got like 8 shots with rending and AP-12 and, you know, it's just, it's monster killer stuff or that to them is the more fun aspect. I genuinely go off of concepts or just models that look cool, whether it's GW or 3D printed rescues. I even mix in like fantasy and games workshop stuff or like WizKids, where I'll actually just be like, well, this one model looks really cool. Like I've got in my vampire army, it's basically a dark elf from Dungeons and Dragons.
That's right, and I think we mentioned that the first time you. One of the first battle reports we played, the Volcanic Dwarves versus your Undead, all my models were GW, all of them.
Yes.
Whereas you had, I think, a half a dozen different manufacturers. Like this character was this squad was from this guy was from this.
Yep.
So obviously then you found that pretty helpful to not be limited.
Yes, yeah, and every once in a while I'll look at the army. Once I had the army built up, I'd look at the army list and be like, is there anything else in my vampires that I want to paint? Or if I'm looking at orcs, because I'm getting towards the end of having all the orcs that I think I want, I'll start looking at it and be like, is there anything else? Or I'll look at models, and people do so many customized models out there, I'll sometimes look at it and be like, oh, that looks really cool. Well, I would definitely paint that. Like, I'm gonna forget the name. Is it not Modular, but that other company that does a lot of this? Like, we've got you did up the Ninja Turtle orcs.
Puppets War?
Puppets War, yeah. The Ninja Turtle orcs. I'm like, I don't need a specialty squad, but Ninja Turtle orcs are badass. So I want to print those up, and I want to play as those.
So you start with the concept, then find the models, then find the rules.
That fit. Yeah. And sometimes, it's just a one-off thing where like I'm on Pinterest or I'm somewhere else. And like I'm gonna blank on the name of it, but where did it go? Oh no, I'm not gonna be able to. I can pull it up real quick. But you and I were just talking about this thing earlier. I got all my Elizabeth Hurley stuff up from our conversation about her.
That's getting cut.
Oh, here it is. It was right here. So the day that we're recording this, Games Workshop just announced their Nightmare Skirmish Combat box.
And you thought the mandrakes were...
I thought the mandrakes just looked freaking badass.
Way too awesome to not put in an undead army.
And so I'm doing up my Space Marines as sort of a homage to the Slaanesh. I mean them to be like 80s synthwave, but they're very Slaanesh too. But I plan on doing that up, and then my fantasy vampires are just fantasy vampires. But like, I look at these models and I'm just sort of like, you know what? I'm gonna find a way to fit them in. I'll just paint them up because they do something for me. So
here's something else that I've been in this for a while. I've seen lots of folks, especially for a time when I worked at a Warhammer store.
And I did not realize you worked at a Warhammer store.
Yeah, for a very, very short time. But
you kept stealing all the stuff, so they were like, "We gotta fire this guy."
But one thing that I did get asked a lot about is how do you choose a paint scheme? Because a lot of folks will just do the box art because it's there and GW provides the paints. They're like, here, just copy this. So how do you pick? Because since you do a lot of rescue models and 3D printing, you don't have necessarily a paint scheme to just copy. So how do you decide what colors to use? What helps you with that?
Cliche thing. I look at art books and I look on like Pinterest. Sometimes it's as simple as being like you see somebody else getting really creative and doing something, and either you do it or you look at it and go like, "Oh, I kind of like the idea there, but I want to."
But I change this and change that.
Yeah, like going back to the Space Marines. Like I'll send you some pictures of them, I guess. But for going for my rank and file, I'm going to have a whole bunch of specialty squads that are 80s themed. But my rank and file, I wanted a synthwave concept, and I think you sent me a picture where somebody had done up a synthwave style, and I was like, "Whoa, that's cool," but to me it was a little imbalanced. So I just took some of my old rescued squaddies and started putting them together. I'm about to curse so loud because I can't find these.
And notice how he just flows from answering the question to swearing about his building stuff.
I've been looking for the same 2 pieces on a sprue, and I've only got 3 sprues. You would think it would be easier to frickin' find.
So you're telling people about some of the learning curve without realizing you're telling people about the learning curve.
Which is these Games Workshop.
Well, then we're almost out of time. We're trying to keep these podcasts to about 45 minutes or so.
Understood.
But okay, so you've had 3D printed where it's just one piece. You stick it on a base and you go. You have rescue that are already built.
Yes.
Right now you are building one of GW's new kits where each Terminator has like a dozen or so pieces. Do you find that aspect of the hobby, can that be enjoyable? Do you find it tedious? Do you think that's something that would keep new players from jumping in? What do you think?
I think depending on the kit, it depends on what kind of person you are. If you're the kind of person that loves instructions, loves details, if you're a Lego person, I was never a Lego person. I was a Lego person.
That's a good point.
I was a Lego person in the sense that, like, I had two cousins growing up. Still do technically. But, like, one cousin was the, this is a kit. And this was before Lego had like all the IPs, so it was all the generic like in space,
the spaceship,
oh god,
the blue space guy.
And I'd like go over to his house and he'd be like, "Do you want to play Legos?" And I'd be like, "Sure." And he would pull out the instruction booklet and sit there.
We're going to build together.
And I was like, "This is not me at all." And then the other side was, my other cousin, he just had a giant bucket of Legos, and so did I, where like you could dump it out and just make whatever the heck you wanted. Like once when I was a kid, I used to play with the 3 3/4-inch G.I. Joes. Those were my jam. Once I did this whole storyline where like Cobra Commander got assassinated by the Joes, and I built a tomb for him. And the whole day of playing was like the Joes. The Joes in my world, I guess, were not that nice. They were trying to get to Cobra Commander's body because they were trying to resurrect it. So my whole storyline was like they were going to resurrect it, and they were going to resurrect the Cobra Commander. So the G.I. Joes had to go in, and it was like, what is it, Castlevania 2? When in Simon's Quest, where it's like, oh, I got to find all the body parts and then destroy the body parts because otherwise they're going to reassemble and make Dracula again. So that was the whole premise. But I got to make the tomb out of, Legos and stuff. But anyway, I was always more of a freeform Lego guy than a monopose. So this is fine.
So the complexity of the kits isn't a problem as long as the parts are there for customization.
Yes, and if that's the kind of person you are you a bucket of Legos, make your own thing person? In which case, I would highly recommend starting with either pre-made models or slightly older models that have a lot more flexibility to them, like the Catachan Jungle Guys, the Orcs.
That is one of my complaints about new Warhammer kits is they're getting more and more pieces per model, but the models still can only turn out one way.
Yep.
I mean, you build the old models from the 1990s, you had the legs, you had a torso, you had a head and 2 arms, and you could swap out all of it.
Yep.
Whereas now, as you're finding out, each of the legs is 2 or 3 pieces. And the torso is 2 pieces, and each arm is 3 pieces.
And apparently they intentionally don't put pieces 64 and 66 on the mother you-know-what sprue. Because they don't want you to make these things, and that's just fine.
So there's another lesson for no folks.
That's fine.
Awesome.
But again, I would say that to me would be the best analogy is like, if you are a Lego instruction book person, like, I'm going to build the Death Star, and it's going to be big, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to take me 6 weeks, but it's going to be great. That's fine. Start with a kit.
Then you'll enjoy that.
Start
that
with a kit.
aspect of
if
it.
you aren't one of those people, then I would say start with stuff that gives you a little bit more customization and freedom.
Okay.
Like, there are other companies too that make models. They don't have to be GW, but give yourself room to do more customization.
So then we're pretty much out of time then. So what would be, if you have any parting words, parting wisdom,
yes,
anything you'd want to end on?
Parting wisdom. My biggest thing would be, don't be afraid to find your own way to do something in the hobby. Because if you're trying to continually do it the way other people tell you to, videos and things like that are always a great place to start, the tutorials and all that. But like I said, I started with how to thin paints and how to do this and how to layer and shade and do all those sorts of things. And it was fine, but it was taking me too long and it didn't fit my personality. Don't feel like you have to stick to that one style, because if you're doing anything in this hobby that you're not enjoying, it very quickly will find its way into... Oh, I found the piece. It'll very quickly find its way into being... It's on the sprue that has nothing else gun-related on it. Of course you would do that, GW. Do it your way and find ways to do it. Learn the basics, but then figure out what's best for you and make sure that you're enjoying it. Don't make it something that suddenly becomes work.
Right. Yeah. Well, once your hobby becomes work, then it's dead.
Oh yeah, and you know, if you're one of these people, I would also say, my general advice is, if you're one of those people that also you live and die by your wins and losses, like if you're that competitive, just know that about yourself and figure out a way to work with that, because I have seen some folks that are super competitive. Like, they're still in it. They've been doing it for years, but they're not enjoying it.
They're not enjoying it. It's sunk cost. They've been doing it for so long, they don't want to abandon all that work.
I found my last two pieces for this one arm.
Well, that's going to do it then for this first podcast. Thanks to Josh for sharing his pearls and nuggets of wisdom.
Bite the pillar, everyone.
Bite the pillar. Oh, golly. I'm going to start making T-shirts with that on.
That video's got to come out soon, because if enough of this other stuff comes out first, people are going to be like, what the heck is Bite the Pillar?
Well, if you don't know, keep watching the videos and eventually it'll make sense.
Eventually.
So until next time, where we'll have someone else on to, we'll talk to them about their aspects on the hobby. We will check their line of sight. Until then,
it may not be perfect, but it's good enough.